What happened to the hype for Khamzat Chimaev? The case of Khamzat Chimaev is an interesting one in that the hype for Khamzat has died down tremendously, despite Khamzat still being undefeated, undoubtedly a huge draw, one of the UFC's newest and biggest superstars, still a title contender and in my opinion, a matchup nightmare for most people at 185. But through his moves between 170 and 185, his ridiculous callouts, his recent underwhelming performances, and most importantly, his inactivity, despite all he has accomplished and potentially will accomplish, his hype and likability has plummeted. And though technically his recent fight with Kamaru Usman was a title eliminator, and again, technically he should be fighting for the belt next, Khamzat's next fight is still up in the air, and we still have nothing officially planned for Khamzat. So of course the question is, how did we get here? But before that question, who do you guys got in the Super Bowl? Listen up, football fans. This is the last weekend of the year to get your football bets in. I've teamed up with DraftKings, and right now is the perfect time to take your shot at the crown. DraftKings is giving all new customers $200 in bonus bets instantly when they place their first $5 bet on anything. There's no time like the present. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using my promo code TJLovesFights. And again, new customers who just bet $5 will get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Wondering what you can use your $200 in bonus bets on? Combine multiple bets together from Super Bowl 58 for a shot at an even bigger payout. If you're already signed up for DraftKings, you can make a bet on Super Bowl 58 and get a bonus bet back. Get a bonus bet in the amount of your initial wager. Max reward varies. If sports betting is not available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have a shot at winning cash prizes. Fellas, it's time to download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use my promo code TJLovesFights and bet just $5 on any wager and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code TJLovesFights only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. I remember Khamzat's rise like it was yesterday. Coming out of Chechnya, Khamzat Chimaev was and still is probably the most aggressive out-of-the-gate wrestler I've ever seen in MMA and debuted this fighting style in the UFC in 2020. Debuting at middleweight, Khamzat opened up his first UFC fight against John Phillips with throwing one kick and immediately taking this fight to the ground. In about a minute, Khamzat got in a dominant position and pounded Phillips to the ground for the rest of the round, with Khamzat landing 72 strikes to Phillips' 1. The second round started out the same way, and Khamzat essentially went to the same position and this time got the submission. And literally 10 days later, Khamzat would do the same thing in his next fight. His second fight against Rice McKee was a man against a child, and it was a little hard to watch, to be honest. Khamzat literally just picked up McKee, put him in his own corner, got McKee flattened out within minutes, and beat him to a pulp. McKee literally had no chance and did not land a single strike. Going into his third fight, he showed his tremendous power this time by knocking out Gerald Meerschaert in literally 17 seconds and again wasn't even touched. Khamzat would then have his breakout performance in his adopted home court of Abu Dhabi in 2021 and put on a grappling masterclass against Li Jingliang, his first ranked opponent at 170. Khamzat, of course, would open up this fight with taking Li to the ground after perfectly timing a takedown under Li's right hand, and iconically carried Li to Dana, talked his talk before putting Li to the canvas. Khamzat would ground and pound in this position before methodically getting both hooks in and flattening out Li. More ground and pound would follow before Khamzat snuck in a rear naked, but credit to Li being tough as hell as he defended Khamzat's first couple attempts and died on his shield as he got slept. And to top off such an iconic performance came quite possibly one of the best and most iconic post-fight interviews. I mean, the high energy, the quote, everybody, I come here for everybody, kill everybody. The call out of Dana White to watch his fight and a couple Allahu Akbars is a recipe for a star. By this point, Khamzat has finished all of his opponents in dominant fashion and only has given up one strike in all of his 4 fights. Following this breakout performance came a big step up in competition when Khamzat was set to face Gilbert Burns, a strong welterweight contender and had fought for the belt against Kamaru a couple fights before. We all knew this was going to be a great fight, but I don't think most of us expected a war. Khamzat opened up this fight with Gilbert trying to take this fight to the ground like many of his other fights, and even though Khamzat took him to the ground briefly, Gilbert kept his composure and defended from his back, bringing this fight back to the feet. And after this grappling exchange, for some reason, they both agreed to keep the fight mostly standing, and I think we were all happy as fans to see. I won't break down this fight in detail, as I would think many of us have seen this fight several times over as it's been uploaded to the UFC channel, but some of the best moments include Khamzat dropping Gilbert Burns with a jab in the opening round. Granted, it was from the southpaw position, but Gilbert also rallied strong in the second by backing up Khamzat with a series of strikes, Spartan kicking Khamzat off his back, and even dropped Khamzat with a perfect right hook at the end of the round. Though of course Khamzat would finish strong, look more composed in the striking in this last round, and ultimately win this fight. Now I think fans took this fight in one of two ways. You either saw Khamzat as human now and less of a monster. Before this fight he had only taken one strike in his entire UFC career, and in this fight got bloodied, at times beaten, and at one point got dropped by a guy who used to fight at 155. Or, on the opposite side of the spectrum, you saw Khamzat as a true contender. Despite a close fight, he very clearly won against Gilbert Burns, who was the second-ranked contender and had recently fought for the belt. People in this camp thought Khamzat had a real chance at defeating Kamaru, who was the champ at the time, and I remember also at the time some went as far as to say he could dethrone Izzy 2 at 185 and become a simultaneous double champ. But whatever the case may be, we can all agree Khamzat mania was at its peak during this time, and whether you thought Khamzat was a true contender or not, after this fight we were all excited to see what would happen next. And what would happen next was a very interesting turn of events, as Khamzat was now set to face Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz was apparently trying to get out of his contract in the UFC at the time and ride out his last fight and not re-sign, and well, Dana decided to send him to the slaughterhouse by matching him up against Khamzat. Though through another interesting turn of events, Khamzat would come into this fight 7.5 pounds overweight and completely miss the welterweight limit. But what made this miss more interesting is that Khamzat didn't seem to care and was laughing on the scale. Khamzat would later say a doctor told him to stop cutting weight, but his insane weight miss and attitude towards the whole thing made him an actual villain to UFC fans overnight. The weight miss would lead to a reshuffle of the card, with Khamzat now fighting Kevin Holland at a catch weight of 180 and Nate to fight Tony at 170. And despite all the negativity surrounding Khamzat, he still gave an incredible performance that fans had to appreciate, as Khamzat came out immediately for Kevin Holland's legs and in minutes got his signature choke with almost no effective resistance from Kevin Holland. But what was more important than the actual fight was the subsequent decision Khamzat had to make after this fight. Was he going to stay at 170 and kill himself trying to make the weight, or would he be going back to middleweight? It was clear from what Dana and his coach said a couple months after the fight that Khamzat would be fighting at middleweight, but now the more important question was who he was going to fight. Dana hinted that he should be going back to middleweight and facing one of the top 3 guys at the time, which was Alex as champ, Izzy at number 1 contender, and Robert Whittaker at number 2. There was also a conspiracy going around that Khamzat was going to face Jared Cannonier based on an IG story of Khamzat studying fight footage, and fans were able to pinpoint that the fight he was watching was of Jared Cannonier. You also had the possibility of a fight with Paulo Costa, as the two had a heated altercation prior to the Kevin Holland fight. So there was a lot of options for Khamzat at middleweight, but not a lot of decision making, as for practically the entire year of 2023 was just rumors and callouts and no official matchmaking. And this is where Khamzat's reputation of being inactive grew significantly, and what made matters worse is that he continued to shit talk and call out guys at middleweight, but as the months passed, there was little substance to anything he said. Finally, over a year after fighting Kevin Holland, Dana announced that Khamzat was going to be fighting Paulo Costa for his return to middleweight, and finally we could see Khamzat fight a legitimate middleweight in Paulo Costa, who was ranked 6th at the time. This was going to be an exciting one for sure, but as per usual with a Paulo Costa fight, he had to pull out due to an elbow injury. But not all hope was lost for a Khamzat fight, as he received a late replacement from Kamaru Usman, which is definitely a better name than Paulo, but given Kamaru is a legitimate welterweight, this was a disappointment to fans who wanted to see if Khamzat can truly hang in the middleweight division. And what was more of a disappointment was the fight itself. Khamzat came out firing hot as he usually does and shot from the moon, still got the takedown and basically sat in this dominant position and pounded away at a helpless Kamaru Usman, getting an easy 10-8 round. This next round was very interesting in that Khamzat would slow down the activity tremendously, giving Kamaru the opportunity at the end of the round to push on the gas a little bit and rock Khamzat with a couple good strikes. Khamzat would get the takedown late in this round, but that, in my opinion, didn't do enough to make up for his inactivity. Now, the third was very interesting in that Kamaru started to come forward and confidently land 1-2s down the middle, some of them looking like they affected Khamzat greatly. It got to the point that Khamzat had to take this fight to the ground and basically controlled Kamaru for the rest of the round. There was a brief last 20 seconds where they got up and threw, but most of it to the air. It was a close fight with Khamzat taking it in a majority decision, and it was later revealed Khamzat's inactivity in those last 2 rounds was likely due to a torn ligament in his hand, but nonetheless, fans were none too pleased with this performance. Besides that first round, Kamaru looked really good in the striking department, looked confident in backing up a monster in Khamzat, and had amazing moments in this fight, and did this on 2 weeks' notice. To this day, you can still see comments on Khamzat's Instagram criticizing the gas tank of Khamzat, saying that if this were 5 rounds, Usman would have easily won, and going as far as to say Usman straight up won their fight. Which brings us to today. Khamzat has been firing off callouts to Izzy, Sean Strickland, and Drake du Plessis, and many more. And to his credit, Dana did say that Khamzat's fight with Kamaru was the title eliminator. But what makes these callouts so annoying to fans and has drastically dropped Khamzat's likability is that 1, most people don't think he deserves a title shot or even a fight at a top middleweight, considering he hasn't fought a top legitimate middleweight yet, and his only fight at middleweight was against a welterweight who was on 2 weeks notice and had an underwhelming performance in that one. And 2, all of these callouts lead to nothing. He's called out Izzy and Alex in the past to nothing as a result. He's called out Sean and Drakus without fighting a top middleweight yet, and the more and more he calls out these guys without actually fighting them, and the more his inactivity is growing, the more and more the fans are starting to dislike him. So what can save Khamzat? I think a fight with a top middleweight contender like Jared Cannonier would do the trick. I mean, his coach was already game planning against Jared Cannonier apparently, and I know this sounds crazy and might be a long shot, but UFC 300 still doesn't have a main event, and if Khamzat can somehow get a relatively quick turnaround from his last fight in October, that would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, proving he could beat a legitimate middleweight contender and also prove that he can fight more than once a year. But what do you guys think? Is Khamzat still a top middleweight contender? Should he even be getting a title shot next? And do you think he's going to break his streak of inactivity? Let me know in the comments below. I'm very interested to see what you guys think about somebody who's so hyped like Khamzat and now in the position that he is in now. But again, thank you guys for watching. Peace.